So, iceberg videos have been going around YouTube like a California wildfire recently, and I figured I would throw my hat into the ring. Hi, I'm Geography Goat. I make geography videos and bad decisions, but you're hopefully only going to know about one of those. I did not get this iceberg from Reddit or Discord or anything like that. I made it myself because I'd only ever seen one geography iceberg before, and to be frank, it was dog shit. Also, before going in, this is not going to be what my normal content is like. You can check that out in the description below if you want. My normal stuff is scripted, this is going to be mostly unscripted. And my normal stuff also isn't this long, so hope you have fun, hope you cozy up with a game, because I know you're probably not actively watching the video. So, let's go! Layer 1. Starting off with Layer 1, we have the United Nations. If you don't know what the United Nations are, I'm very, very sorry, but you are way too young to be watching this video. So, the UN is basically an organization that encompasses pretty much every country on Earth. There are some standouts that we'll be getting into later, but for the most part, this is going to be every country that you could possibly go to or have access to or talk to or whatever. They don't do a whole lot policy-wise. A lot of their stuff is just suggestions, but they do have a lot of good stuff in regards to international cooperation. But again, they don't do a whole lot on policy. So you're gonna want to look at some smaller organizations for that. And speaking of smaller organizations, the G20 is, funnily enough, a group of 19 countries that are joined together in a big ol' pact. And these guys get together and they meet every year to discuss business, treaties, banking, specifically banking, and they basically try to get along, even if they usually don't. It is a very, very Eurocentric organization, with about half of the members being either European or totally not European, but we're still mostly European colonies, like the US, Canada, Australia, you know the drill. But they are still one of the big boys when it comes to international organizations. Another one of the big boys is NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which basically is a big old organization that is all gathered together to suck America off by invading wherever it decides to go. Have you ever wondered why there were British troops in the invasion of Iraq? Well, NATO's why. NATO also helps with a lot of trade routes and stuff, but, you know, that's not as fun to talk about as making fun of the United States. The European Union is, shocker, a union of European states, with a couple notable exceptions. Switzerland isn't in it, except for in spirit, and a whole lot of Eastern Bloc countries are still vying to get in, but can't get in on account of the whole, you know, dictatorship thing. The EU is arguably the reason why there hasn't been a big world war since World War II, and it's also arguably a brain-dead, useless organization that can be deadlocked by one dumbass Polish dude and two dumbass Hungarian dudes with little to no effort. There's a lot to get into on the issue of the EU and whether or not Brexit should have happened and whether or not Poland and Hungary are assholes or whatever. Whatever have you. There's a lot to talk about here. We gotta move on. Antarctica is a big useless chunk of ice at the bottom of the Earth. It's the southernmost point of the world, it is the world's largest desert by absolutely technical definition, and it is one of the only places on Earth that is not claimed by any country, but if you look into it, that's actually kind of horseshit. Antarctica is claimed by a whole bunch of different countries in a whole lot of different ways, and to get into that, we would have to bring out the old chart, and I don't like bringing out the old chart ever since last Wednesday when the incident happened. Essentially, what Antarctica is a place for scientists to study how cold things are, what cold is, what ice does when you put it in Coca-Cola, you know, stuff like that. It's also a place for penguins to live, which is pretty nice. I support penguins having their own country. Guess what you can also find there? Guess what? Guess what? Guess what? It's icebergs. It's icebergs, dickhead. You can find icebergs there. That's a funny meme. That's the meme. Okay, we're done with Layer 1. Let's move on to Layer 2. To To start off Layer 2, we got the UN Observer States. These are basically two countries that are in the UN, but technically not in the UN. It's complicated. They basically don't have full voting power. These are Palestine and the Vatican City, and one of those is not like the other. Palestine is not a member state because Israel fiercely objects to it, and Israel has a lot of friends in very, very high places. This is basically the same reason Taiwan isn't in, but they let him be an observer instead of just kicking him out altogether. The Vatican City is only in because it used to be very, very important, Holy Roman Empire and all that, but once they realized that the Holy Roman Empire is neither Holy Roman nor an empire, they decided to downgrade them to observer. Also, the Holy Roman Empire wasn't in the UN because the UN didn't exist then. This is basically the friend zone of the UN. Taiwan is the exile government that used to rule the Chinese mainland and used to be the Qing dynasty before the Communist Revolution happened. It is an independent government from China that China claims as its own, and since China is one of the big five in the UN that has veto power over anything, they get to do what they want. There's a cry every other year or so that Taiwan is gonna get in, Taiwan's gonna get in, and Taiwan's gotta get in this year, and then it never happens. Taiwan is basically independent, they basically can do whatever they want, and every country does have dealings with them under the table, but right now they're in a bit of a bad spot UN-wise, so they're not considered an official country. Constituent countries are essentially countries that aren't independent. These are your Scotlands, your Northern Irelands, your Wales, your Wallachia, all of those different places. You've also got the colonies that never wanted to be uncolonized, like the island of Reunion, the island of Mayotte, the islands of Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire. You know, these are basically countries with their own governments, their own special things, but they're not technically independent. Okay, you know how Somalia is kind of shaped like a sideways check mark? No, you fucking don't. No, you fucking don't. You don't know where Somalia is on the map. Don't lie to yourself. The check part on the right side, that's Somaliland. Somaliland is a functionally independent country that has its own passport, has its own relations with other countries, but is still technically considered part of Somalia by the entire international community. God knows why, because Somalia didn't have a government at all for a good long while. Essentially, Somaliland isn't considered independent by any other independent countries because if Somaliland is considered independent, what's that gonna mean for us? Is Jim from down the street, who put an upside-down American flag on his yard, said he lived in Americadonia? Is that man an independent nation? The funny thing is, Somaliland is actually one of the safest countries in Africa to visit, but because it's attached to Somalia, every country's got a level 4 warning for it. Tibet's a bit of a sad case. It was originally part of the Qing dynasty and was independent once the Qing dynasty fell, but after that, it was annexed by China and had its culture pretty much erased. Yeah, the CCP isn't particularly fond of religion, and when you have a country that is ruled by Buddhists, you get a lot of issues. Technically, on paper, it is considered an autonomous region of China, but it's not. It's really, really not. The Tibetan culture has been pretty much wiped from the face of the earth, and that's pretty sad. There are independence movements, and the Dalai Lama is actually from Tibet. That's where the whole Dalai Lama thing originated. But it doesn't look like Tibet's getting its independence back anytime soon. Kosovo is a partially recognized country that was given its independence with the fall of Yugoslavia, and a bloody, bloody war to go along with it. Serbia doesn't recognize Kosovo's existence, and that's pretty much it. That's the reason it's not a UN member state. Two of the big five, Russia and China, don't recognize its existence, mainly because, well, if we recognize Kosovo's existence, what, is Jim from down the street who's got an upside-down Russian flag? You know the rest of the joke. You know the rest of the joke. The last one we have to talk about in Layer 2 is Western Sahara, which is a country on the western part of the Sahara Desert. I know. we got some real big shockers here. European Union, Western Sahara. What the hell's going on with these name schemes? Basically, Western Sahara is considered the southern part of Morocco because the Spanish used to have a country called the Spanish Sahara there that was basically one of their scramble for Africa bits. Instead of giving it its independence when decolonialization happened, Spain was just like, fuck you, take it, whatever, and gave it to basically anybody in the area who wanted it. Then started a war between Mauritania, Morocco, and Western Sahara to see who actually had control over the territory. And the answer is, Currently, there is an exile government in Algeria for the native Sahrawi people. I don't think I pronounced that correctly. Basically, what Western Sahara is right now is functionally the southern part of Morocco. Most of the people living in the actual parts of the country are Moroccan. But there is a sliver of land controlled by the Sahrawi people, and they do have some relations with other African states. With that, let's move on to Layer 3. Northern Cyprus is a Turkish-occupied state in the northern half of Cyprus. The country is basically split in two, with the Greek half on the bottom and the Turkish half on top. Basically, what happened is Turkey invaded Cyprus, they didn't get all the way, and they've just kind of sat there ever since. There are a lot of places throughout the island that are completely abandoned because the UN has decided arbitrarily that that's the buffer zone between the two places, so you can't have people sitting side by side even though the conflict is pretty cold by now. Northern Cyprus isn't recognized by any country except Turkey. Even Turkey's closest friends, like Azerbaijan, they don't recognize it. Oh boy, after the Taiwan episode, I told myself I would never talk about these again, but here we go. These are the Spratly Islands. They're in the South China Sea, and Taiwan claims all of them, China claims all of them, Vietnam claims some, Brunei claims some, Malaysia claims some, the Philippines claims some. Basically, it's a giant clusterfuck because this is one of the biggest shipping routes in the world, and having the ability to set up some, toll pass through these islands is big. There's the fishing rights, there's the possibility of oil, there's a whole lot of shit going down in these islands that basically makes them the hot shit in the South China Sea. These are probably the most hotly contested bits of land in the world that have never actually devolved into straight up war. Also, fun fact, Indonesia doesn't claim any of them, despite how close they are to it. Yeah, I found that kind of weird. They're closer than the Philippines in some places. Rojava is the country/de facto independent state that was set up by Syrian rebels in the aftermath/ongoing Syrian civil war. Basically, Rojava is the territory that they hold pretty securely. It's gained a lot of popularity in the West for being probably the most liberal place in the Middle East. There are very, very good gender equality laws, a whole lot of social equality stuff. It's got a good government going for it. Too bad about the whole, Syrian civil war thing going on. Hope they do good. Let's clap for them. I don't know if you clapped or not, but I'm just gonna hope you did. Sealand is probably the most popular micronation to exist because of its guerrilla marketing. Basically, it was an old British Navy tower that got abandoned after World War II, as you do with your old Navy towers. Basically what happened is a bunch of people went there and decided, hey, this is technically outside of British international waters, so we're gonna claim it as our own. Of course, this didn't fly, and Britain sent a team out to get them off the island, but they came back, and now they sell passports for the place. Passports, Duke ship, whatever have you, you can buy it, and these guys make a lot of money off of that. This has been going on for a while, too. It's very, very popular. It's a big funny joke, funny meme, haha, but, it's not a real nation. It's not like your friend who told you, hey, these guys, they founded their own nation. No, they didn't, actually. This is not considered a real nation by any other country in the world. Assuming most of my audience can read and isn't stupid, you should probably know that there was a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan last year. This was over the Nagorno-Karabakh region that lies between the two countries, which is known as Artsakh by the people who actually live there. The Republic of Artsakh is that region basically trying for independence. They're not getting it because both Armenia and Azerbaijan want part of it as their own. Azerbaijan has Azeris there, Armenia has Armenians there. There's not going to be a peaceful solution to the conflict anytime soon. There's a lot of bullshit regarding the area. Like, online, I've seen at least 20 different people claiming that Artsakh was only vying for independence to get annexed by Armenia/Azerbaijan. Which one it is varies depending on the cycle of the moon and the phase of Jupiter. As of now, the war has ended, but there isn't really a solution to the conflict because both sides are still pretty dissatisfied with the result. Hey, would you look at that? It's the Aral Sea. I've already made a video about how the Aral Sea disappeared, which you can check out in the description below, or by clicking on that little annotation that hopefully just popped up. Basically, what happened is, the Aral Sea is an ocean/sea/big lake that disappeared. Go watch the video, there's a lot of information about it there. The Sovereign Order of Malta is essentially the Knights Templar. No, really, that's what it is. The Knights Templar come from Malta, and this is a military organization that is from Malta but isn't Malta. It's an international military organization that has its own dealings with countries and the like. What they do is essentially be combat medics for the rest of the world that have diplomatic relations with them, but they're a lot more interesting than other NGOs because they're the main antagonist of Assassin's Creed. No, really, these guys are the Knights Templar. That's literally where they came from. People talk about conspiracy shit like, oh, the Templars are actually ruling the world. Is George Washington a Templar? No, these guys are the Templars. These guys are the modern-day Templars. That's who they are. They're not even secretive about it. I don't know why people still think that the Templars are like some shadow shit. It's just some dudes out of Malta being bros. So, being extravagant, it shouldn't come as any surprise that the UAE has tried its hand at earth-moving. But earth-moving is a lot more literal in this sense because the UAE, specifically Dubai's Sheikh Mohammed, commissioned in 2003 and later completed a recreation of the entire world map out of artificial islands off the coast of Dubai. No, it's not to scale, and no, most of them aren't inhabited by anybody. But it's really cool. You should take a look at it on Google Maps when you have the time. It's just kind of a cool thing to look at. Dubai's not a stranger to artificial islands, but this is definitely one of the more interesting ones they've made. Molossia is another micronation, but much more explicitly a joke than Sealand is. The currency is pegged to the relative value of Pillsbury cookie dough, and they are at war with East Germany despite the fact that East Germany hasn't existed for 2 decades. It was created in the 70s as a childhood project and is just one guy's house and the land he owns around it. Astute viewers may recognize that name as the location of the Nostalgia Critic's first movie, Kick-Assia. Yes, it was shot on location, and yes, the president of Molossia plays himself in the movie. So, thank God for the Nostalgia Critic for bringing light to Molossian culture to the world over. Did you know that the southern state of Chiapas in Mexico is mostly controlled by a rebel government? No? Well, I mean, it's kind of like the Rojava thing. It's just like a far-left rebel government that has control over a significant portion of the area. It's pretty cool. Very popular in the West left-wing circles. I've heard about it from there. I mean, they're not violent or anything. They're not like a terrorist group like ISIS. They're just kind of vibing. They're at war with the government, but, like, they don't hurt civilians. They're just vibing. Hey, did you know that Taiwan's border is kind of fucky? You did? Well, you must have watched my video on it then. If you haven't, go ahead and click up here, because I'm not repeating myself. That video took a month to finish. And with that, we're out of Layer 3. Welcome to Layer 4. We're moving down, so things are going to get a little more fucky, a little more sinister, a little more weird and out there. You might not have heard of most of these. Definitely won't have heard of them by the time we get to Layer 7. But, to start off Layer 4, we have the Jammu and Kashmir conflict. To sum up this conflict in about the most white Westerner way possible, when Britain drew the lines separating India and Pakistan, they kinda didn't give a shit about the natives, so they drew the lines wherever they wanted, and thus there's a border conflict at the tip of both countries on whether or not Pakistan or India owns the Jammu and Kashmir regions of the states. The thing is, both Jammu and Kashmir have significant Indian and Pakistani populations, so it's kind of just bad for everybody. There's been an uncountable amount of bloodshed over the region, and honestly, at this point, it's probably for the best that they just go independent, but that's not gonna happen anytime soon. Especially not since China also wants a part of the region, so probably gonna be one of those forever wars. So, the peanut hole is essentially what happens when you apply one-size-fits-all logic to international relations. The UN determined what constitutes your maritime boundaries a while back, and Russia initially thought that they had a really good deal going on since, Russia makes up most of the world. That changed, however, when they found out they had a little tiny hole nicknamed the Peanut Hole near the Kamchatka Peninsula in the eastern side of their country. No big deal, right? They can just fish in that hole anyway since it's international waters, right? Well, the problem came when Chinese fishers and other fishers from America came to fish in that hole instead, taking up the fish that lived in the Russian waters surrounding it. Russia wasn't very happy about this because it cost them a lot of money in fish rights, so they had the hole closed officially by the UN after a while. The UN defined the maritime borders as a certain distance away from the coastline, so when Russia's weirdly shaped peninsula came into the mix, they didn't realize that they would have a hole in the middle. Basically, don't apply machine logic to real-life shit. The Bir Tawil trapezoid is a trapezoid of land in between Egypt and Sudan that is completely unclaimed by any nation. It's one of the last places on Earth to not be claimed outside of Antarctica, which has made a lot of intrepid adventurers try to go there and claim their own micronation, which is swiftly put to a stop by the Egyptian authorities. The reason that it's unclaimed is because of, colonialism. They didn't draw the lines there. The only reason that it hasn't been claimed nowadays is because the Halaib Triangle to the right is disputed between both countries, and it's kind of agreed upon that the loser gets the trapezoid, which has nothing in it. Basically, it's a spot of desert that's a consolation prize, but a bunch of college students think it's hot shit because they don't want to pay their taxes. So, you wouldn't think that you can drive from the tip of North America to the tip of South America, but you would be mostly wrong, because the Pan American Highway goes through the vast majority of it, with one exception, and that's the Darien Gap on the border between Panama and Colombia, which does not have any roads going through it. In fact, there's almost nothing that you can safely drive on since it's all rainforests and rivers all the way down. It's also got some very, very dangerous cartel activity and a whole lot of native populations that don't want to be disturbed. There actually was an attempt to make a road there back in the 70s, but it failed miserably because, rainforest. And they didn't want to bulldoze the rainforest down, so they've just decided that it's going to remain the Darien Gap for the foreseeable future. Azawad is the entire reason that people don't ever go to Timbuktu anymore, because it's really dangerous now because of the Tuareg rebels in the area, and, Al-Qaeda. Basically, in the early 2000s, the Azawad government was set up in northern Mali and quickly beaten back by the Malian government proper. The northern half of Mali is mostly Sahara, and the southern half is mostly Sahel, which has more trees and shit. Now, Saharan people and Sahel people do not like being governed by each other, so it was only inevitable that an independence movement would break out at some point. Currently, Azawad doesn't exist anymore. It's claimed by the Malian government entirely and mostly administered by them, except for some rare Al-Qaeda factions. So, back when colonialism was still big instead of, neo-colonialism, the hip new colonialism that we're doing nowadays, Britain and the Russian Empire did not like each other very much. Now, Britain held Pakistan, and the Russian Empire held, Russia, and both of them converged at Afghanistan. What they did was, they had Afghanistan annex a little sliver of both countries so that they wouldn't have a border with each other. Nice. Friendly. I sure am glad that they did that, because now Afghanistan has this weird little tumor growing off of it that a lot of people wonder why that's there. What's that border to do with? Well, the answer is colonialism. Fun fact, the answer is colonialism to that question most of the damn time. Like, this is basically the reason for Namibia's little weird tumor, too. Native American reservations are all over the continental United States, but there's one in particular that's frickin' huge. The Navajo Nation in Arizona and New Mexico is a nation that is bigger than some US states. It has its own government, has its own laws, and is only bound by the US federal government's regulations. Basically, this is a micronation inside of the US itself. It's pretty interesting. I've been there myself. Somebody tried to sell me dinosaur bones on the side of the road one time, and my parents actually bought one. I don't think they were real dinosaur bones. Point Roberts is a US exclave underneath Canada. The 49th parallel is what defines the border between Canada and the United States on the west coast, so since this tiny, tiny sliver of land falls below the 49th parallel, it belongs to the US. The thing about getting to this place, however, is that you gotta rent a boat or go on a ferry, or you gotta cross over to Canada to get there. Most people having to cross over to Canada. The thing about that, on the other hand, is that it makes it so hard to get in there if you're part of the mafia or whatever that the FBI's been using it for witness protection for decades now. Like, this town is mostly made up of people who have shit to hide. It's got 1,000 residents, and I would bet every one of them is X something or other. So, we talked earlier in this iceberg about the country of Mayotte, which is a constituent country of France or an overseas territory or whatever you want to call it. It's basically administered by France. However, the people of Comoros would say otherwise, because the Comoros government believes Mayotte is part of their territory. Well, what's weird about this in particular is the Comoros has gone far enough to represent Mayotte as one of the 4 stars on their flag. The stars represent Mohale, Grand Comore, Anjouan, and Mayotte. It's not a hostile border claim, it's just that the Comoros people really, really like Mayotte and want them as part of their country, because they think they're brothers. Which, I mean, I guess it's wholesome, but, you know, there's probably something not wholesome about it. When you dig far enough into any geography things, it gets really not wholesome really fast, so keep that in mind. Christiania is yet another micronation, this time in Denmark, in the capital of Copenhagen. Christiania has control over an army barracks that was deserted, and basically, they use it to sell weed. Christiania is the first weed-based government in the entire world. You see, in Copenhagen, weed's not legal, but in Christiania, hell yeah, that shit's legal, and it's on every street corner. The Danish government cracked down on this multiple times, but they never re-annexed the place, so they've just kind of let the place go. And in recent years, it's very, very common for people to pop down to Christiania for a quick smonk. Weirdly enough, there's actually been multiple massacres here in opposition to the government, which is fucking bizarre to me, but it just kind of shows how fucked humanity is. Alright, to finish out Layer 4, we have Liberland, which is another micronation that lies between the borders of Serbia and Croatia. Not on the borders, between them. You see, Serbia and Croatia at a certain point have their borders demarcated by a river, and there's an island in the center of that river. And Serbia said, "Hey Croatia, do you want this?" And Croatia said, "Nah, we don't really want it." And there was a lot more gunfire involved than what I just described, but that's basically how it went down. This is another instance of terra nullius, neutral territory, unclaimed land, and Liberland is a guy that went there and tried to claim it as his own country. He set up shop there, and then was promptly arrested by the Croatian authorities. So, I mean, I guess if you had to pin it to someone, it'd be Croatia, but, you know, technically, nobody owns this tiny, tiny island that has nobody living on it. And with that, let's go down to Layer 5. Welcome to Level 5. We're going to start it off with a micronation called Cotomisto. Cotomisto was/is a micronation that was on the border between Spain and Portugal. I say was/is because while the country doesn't exist anymore, there are a significant amount of people that live in the area that claim to be of Cotomistan descent and culture. You see, Cotomisto was a tiny sliver of land between two countries that frequently butted heads, so it shouldn't have existed, but through a complex system of bullshit, they managed to weasel their way out of getting annexed until the mid-1800s. If they weren't annexed, we'd probably be speaking of them in the same breath as Monaco, San Marino, Liechtenstein, and all the other European micronations that somehow managed to survive. It's a neat looking place, and like I said, there is a bit of a revival movement going on, where people are trying to get back in with their Cotomistan roots. Bouvet Island is an uninhabited island near Antarctica that has the honor of being the most remote island on Earth. Administered by Norway, it's a very desolate place, and you'd have to be a very unfortunate soul to wind up there, but that's exactly what happened to some poor sap who fled there from a sinking ship on a rowboat. You see, out of everywhere in the ocean they could have gone, they went to the one island in 1,000 square miles. Their rowboat was discovered, but the weird thing is no bodies were ever discovered. A lot of people to this day debate on what happened to the poor guy, if he managed to escape to safety against impossible odds, was picked up by a ship that wasn't registered, or just wound up dying and buried in snow that nobody's ever found. Personally, I'm of the shape of water become a fish man type thing, but that's just me. Clipperton Island is an island off the coast of Mexico that has a bizarre story that I've done a video on. If you want the Cliff's Notes version, there was a murder cult on the island that eventually ended with a big-ass fight scene. You should watch the video, it's pretty cool. Lovely is a micronation created theoretically in the BBC special, How to Start Your Own Micronation, a 6-part comedy special by comedian Danny Wallace. In the special, he goes through the process of creating a country and does so online, getting citizens around the world to declare their own apartments, houses, and whatnot as part of the Kingdom of Lovely. In the kingdom's short run, it declared war on Eel Pie Island in London, as well as attempted to buy an island off the coast of Ireland using the nation's currency of the Interdependent Occupational Unit. That's IOU. It's pretty clearly a comedy, but it goes through the motions of how you would go about making a micronation, and given the sheer amount of these on the list, I figured this is the one to end it all on. Kind of. Užupis is another micronation that is stationed in the capital of Lithuania, Vilnius. It's made up of a particularly artistically endowed neighborhood that declared their independence on April 1st as a sort of joke, but sort of not really. The place is basically an artistic community that all tries to make the craziest works of art that they can, the nation itself being an example of it. They have their own road signs, language, and all that jazz, and their flag is pretty dope. Sandy Island is an island off the coast of New Caledonia in Oceania that does not exist. Despite being on maps for centuries now, the island does not exist, as proven by a 1999 expedition to the location. Theories range from the island being destroyed by waves to pumice rafts, but the weird thing is that Google Maps actually displayed the island for a while before correcting it to nothing. Maybe there is something there and nobody wants it found out about. Maybe, maybe not, who knows. Neutral Moresnet was a country that existed in the early 1800s and stopped existing in the early 1900s. It existed at the tri-point between Prussia, the Netherlands, and the Kingdom of Belgium. It was used as a neutral territory between the three parties as they were constantly in conflict with each other. It was ceded to Belgium in the Treaty of Versailles and eventually became nothing more than a part of Belgium, now considered a tri-point between the three countries. In 2020, the last surviving member of the original republic died, so there's basically nothing of it left. The Danakil Depression is in the Afar Valley of Ethiopia and is the hottest place on Earth. There you can find acid pools, volcanoes, and blue lava at all times of the year. It's 100 meters below sea level, and despite all of that, people actually live there. There are native tribes that live there. I don't know how they do it. If you want to go there yourself, be prepared for a 4-day camel trek over there and, some of the hottest conditions you'll ever experience. But it's worth it. You get to see that cool acid and probably accidentally step in, because unlike Yellowstone, there ain't no safety rails here. Zone Rouge is a testament to human destructive capabilities in modern-day France. During World War I, a whole lot of gas canisters were shot and a whole lot of them never exploded, and a whole lot more of them did explode and seeped into the valleys and crevices of France itself. Nowadays, Zone Rouge is a more devastated place than the Pripyat exclusion zone. Nobody's allowed to go in and nobody's allowed to live there. It's been reclaimed by nature despite the fact that it's actively poisoning the nature that seeks to reclaim it. Some areas are completely uncleanable, the rest being just extremely dangerous. Some villages were never allowed to be rebuilt after the war because of their proximity to Zone Rouge. It's unlikely that they'll be cleaned for another 1,000 years or so. India and Bangladesh held for a while the world's only third-order enclave. That's an enclave within an enclave within an enclave within another enclave. Basically, the border between the two countries is so fucked because, during colonialism times, kings and businessmen gambled off different parts of land as what amounts to poker chips. What was so valuable that we would have a 3-order enclave to protect it? Well, just some farmer's backyard, really. There's just an entire section of his farm that he couldn't build in. Nowadays, it's been sorted out and the border has been cleaned up a good bit. But for a while, there was a tiny, few meter wide square of nothing in the middle of some guy's farm because of this third-order enclave. To finish off our micronation roulette, we have space, the final frontier. Well, you would think so, but as it turns out, no country can actually claim anything that's in space, which makes sense, we're on Earth. Nobody lives in space. But that hasn't stopped a few people from trying. We have both Asgardia and Celestia, no not that one, to thank for their entries into the space colonization program. You see, Asgardia and Celestia both claim all of space so that no other country can do so, which won't stop any country from doing so when the time comes. But hey, if the US doesn't build a base on Mars because some dumbass in Ohio decided, hey, I'm gonna claim space, thank them, I guess. Now we're getting deep here. We're on layer 6. The southernmost point in the world is obvious. It's Antarctica, the South Pole. There's land there. That's very easy. But the northernmost point is a lot more contentious. You see, there's an ocean there. So, what's the northernmost point of land? Well, by most definitions, it would be Kaffeklubben Island off the coast of Greenland, but the actual northernmost point on Earth right now is 8342, a rock formation slightly to the north of that island. You see, scientists aren't sure whether or not this rock formation is actually permanent, so time will tell, but as of right now, that is the closest point to the North Pole you can possibly get. Not that anybody would go there because it's a rock in an ocean, but, you could. The Semipalatinsk testing site, also known as the Polygon, was the USSR's nuclear testing grounds in Kazakhstan. It occupies a massive area and has caused dozens upon dozens of birth defects over the years because they didn't take the proper precautions at all when testing their bombs. Bombs were thrown willy-nilly, sometimes people weren't even evacuated, and things overall were really messy. To this day, and probably for the next several hundred years, the land is horribly irradiated, animals die near it, and people get horribly sick when going near the place. Man, what is it with Kazakhstan and getting their land fucked over by the USSR? This is like a really weird pattern. In Cyprus, there is a red lake near the town of Mitsero, which has a red hue because of the toxic mining chemicals that were used near it. The lake is extremely toxic to humans, so you're not going to find anybody swimming there, but it is a pretty sight to look at unless you find a suitcase in it, because that was the case with the Mitsero murders. The Mitsero murders were a series of murders where bodies were dumped into the red lake in suitcases to be melted down by the chemicals naturally. This didn't work according to plan because, fortunately, the criminal was a fucking moron and didn't realize that the suitcases would insulate the bodies. Nowadays, the Mitsero Red Lake is the site of local folklore, with the Red Lake being attributed to the blood of the victims. But no, it's just an environmental scar. Looks pretty though. The equator and the Grand Meridian are the two lines that bisect the Earth, one north by south and the other east by west. Now, what happens when these lines cross? Well, you get Point Zero, otherwise known as Null Island. It's off the coast of Africa, and it's not an actual island, but there is a buoy there to mark it. Some people do go out to see it. They go see the buoy. People will go see anything if you give them enough money. Alboran Island is an uninhabited island in the Mediterranean Sea near Spain and Morocco. Despite the fact that it has had absolutely no naval significance in the entire history of the world, Spain has fought 2 wars for the damn thing. The first war, they fought against a pirate base on the island to reclaim it, and the second, they fought against the Soviet Union trying to establish a fishing colony on the island. After that, they finally decided, hey, we should actually stay here if we want to bomb the shit out of it. And they did after that, making a navy base and an automated lighthouse. Hey, we're back to icebergs again, with a fun fact that I heard when I was in Iceland. You see, someone there told me that they don't often get polar bears because polar bears aren't native to Iceland, but they do show up on occasion. Which is weird. Do polar bears just materialize out of nowhere? There's no way they can make the swim from Greenland to there. No. What polar bears actually do to get to Iceland is they hitch a ride on an iceberg that then crashes into Iceland. Weird, huh? I'm gonna be honest, I included this one just because I thought it would be funny to include shit about icebergs on the iceberg. But there you go, polar bears, how they get to Iceland. Google Maps uses satellite data to make a map of the entire Earth, but sometimes that's not entirely accurate, as is the case with a lot of US military installations. You can't see a lot of proving grounds on Google Maps because the US government has requested that they be blurred, understandably. In addition to that, there are also some very rich and famous people's households that are blurred for obvious reasons, so the paparazzi can't take pictures from afar. But one place in particular is very odd. You see, there's a mountain in the Himalayas that is covered by a black splotch, and nobody to this day knows why. It's in the Himalayas, so it's obviously very hard to get to, but why is it there? Is that just an error? Is that intentional? Who knows? For our last expedition, in Layer 6, let's talk about Minerva, a micronation formed on the Minerva Reefs off the coast of Tonga. You see, there was an idea that if you made your own country, you could have the claim to the land, which is understandable. If you make an island, you should be able to live there, right? Well, not quite so. You see, the people that made the island of Minerva didn't take into account that the Tongan reefs of Minerva were long-time held fishing locations for the Tongan people. Thus, Tonga annexed the island, and when that annexation was ignored, they outright invaded the island and kicked all the Americans off. Many expeditions have been made to reclaim the island, but so far it's still under the protection of Tonga. Welcome to the spooky, scary 7th layer, the big dark one, the big scary. To start it off with, we're going to talk about the Hamar Daban Pass incident, otherwise known as Dyatlov Pass 2.0. Now, you've probably heard of Dyatlov Pass. After all, it's had how many movie adaptations now? I know it's got a shitty video game, but you've heard of it. But you probably haven't heard of Hamar Daban. And the thing about Hamar Daban is, it actually has a witness account of what happened. You see, In the Hamardaman Pass, a couple of hikers were going with an experienced pro through the pass. It wasn't a very dangerous excursion, as the pass was known for being very friendly, but an unexpected winter storm caught them, and, well, to put it simply, a lot of them fell victim to a strange phenomenon where they bled out of every orifice before violently dying, with the only survivor being Valery Udachenko. I only touched on this topic, but there's a lot more to it, and I'll link a video about it in the description below if you want to see more. Proxy wars are a hell of a drug, and were big during the Cold War, and are still pretty big today. The Azu Strip is a strip of desert in the Sahara Desert between Chad and Libya that has basically no inhabitants and no natural resources. This, however, was the cause for an ideological war between the US and the Soviet Union. On paper, Chad and Libya were fighting each other over this absolutely unimportant piece of land that had no oil on it and was basically useless. But because the US was backing Chad and the Soviet Union was backing Libya, things were a bit more complicated. And in the end, Chad won the strip and got to keep all the useless sand to themselves. Go Chad, I guess. You won sand. Transnistria is an autonomous section of Moldova across the Dniester River. It's notably the only flag in the world that has the communist hammer and sickle still on it after the fall of the USSR, unless you count Angola, which I don't because that one's way cooler. Transnistria is functionally its own government, but has absolutely no recognition outside of the very few micronations that also recognize it. It's basically a little slice of the Soviet Union that managed to survive into the 21st century. Closed cities are cities within countries that are, for whatever reason, closed to the general public. You can't move there, and more often than not, the people in them can't move out. These are very popular scientific sites in the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War. Notably, one in particular is Mercury in the United States. Very little is known about this town other than that it's still active and still has about 500 people living there, despite the fact that that's way down from the 50,000 that used to inhabit it. There are too many horror stories of the Soviet Union prison camps / closed cities to list, so I'm just gonna leave a Wikipedia article there for you to look at if you want to, because we need to move on. Lake Nyos is a lake in Cameroon with a magma pocket underneath it that constantly leaks CO2 upwards into the lake itself. It holds the title as the world's deadliest lake, as in the 80s a landslide triggered a massive explosion of CO2 that suffocated a nearby village, killing over 1,000 people. There are 2 other lakes in the entire world that have similar properties and the capacity to have a CO2 explosion of similar quantity. One also in Cameroon and another in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And we can only hope that they don't have similar fates. The Diomede Islands are a land border between Russia and the United States. But wait, there's no land border between Russia and the United States, there's ocean there. Well, you're right. But there's also a couple of islands, one of which is split in half, with half going to Russia and half going to the United States, which also means that it's a separate day on one half of the island than it is to the other. Hotel Arbez is a hotel that straddles the border between France and Switzerland that was created because of a border dispute between the 2 countries. One businessman got the idea to purchase a building that was straddling the border, as per a recent retro-succession attempt from Napoleonic times. What's fun about this hotel is that during World War II, German soldiers were strictly prohibited from visiting Switzerland, so they could only enter on the French side of the building. Since the Swiss were mostly inhabiting the top part of the building, they weren't allowed to enter that part of the building either and could only stay on the bottom floors. There are records of Nazis actually staying in the bottom floors while Swiss and French resistance members colluded in the top floors. Centralia, Pennsylvania is a town that's on fire and will be for the next 250 years. In the early 60s, there was a trash disposal problem in an abandoned mine, so people in the town put 2 and 2 together and threw the trash in. When they went to burn it, however, they noticed that the fire didn't exactly stop. This is because they had actually ignited a coal vein that was seeping smoke up into the town itself. parts of the ground are still hot to this day, and the US government has used eminent domain to force most of the residents out, with only a few remaining to this day. Cumbre Vieja is a volcano in the Canary Islands, specifically the island of La Palma, that has a not insignificant chance of destroying the eastern United States. You see, if Cumbre Vieja erupts, which it has very frequently in the past, parts of the island could fall off due to the tremors and sink into the ocean below, causing a tsunami that would cause waves of over 300 feet to hit the eastern United States. This would wipe out millions of people with very, very little warning to actually get out. Fun to think about. And finally, to end the iceberg, we have the island of Elugelab, which is probably the biggest testament to what humans can actually do. Elugelab was a nuclear testing site by the United States that doesn't exist anymore. It was blown out of existence by a hydrogen bomb. That's right, an island in the Marshall Islands doesn't exist anymore because of a hydrogen bomb that was created specifically for the sole purpose of using on people. I don't really have a joke there, that's just kind of a scary thought. Hey, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you like to support the channel, well, you can subscribe, share it around, comment, do the usual. You know what to do. You know what to do. If you like content like this, I make a lot more scripted content. But if this video gets popular, I'll probably do a couple more unedited things in the future. So, peace, have a good night. Enjoy whatever game you're probably playing while you listen to these.